Resurrecting Lost Worlds: How Western Curiosity Deciphered the Ancient Middle East. The Rediscovery of Antiquity, Western Scholarship, and the Reclamation of the Ancient Middle East. An essay. Introduction: A landscape of forgotten grandeur. For millennia, the imposing ruins scattered across the Middle East, from the pyramids of Giza to the buried ziggurats of Mesopotamia and the crumbling Phoenician ports of the Levant, stood as silent, enigmatic monuments. To the indigenous populations living among them, these structures were woven into the fabric of local folklore, superstition, and religious tradition, but their original histories were lost. They were seen as the works of giants or jinn, served as convenient quarries for building materials, or were venerated as sites of vague biblical or Quranic significance without scholarly understanding. The systematic knowledge of the ancient languages, chronologies, and societal structures that built these wonders had faded into oblivion over centuries of conquest, cultural shift, and changing religious priorities. This profound disconnection set the stage for one of the greatest intellectual adventures of the modern era: the systematic rediscovery of these civilizations by Western scholars, explorers, and archaeologists. Beginning in the late 18th century and accelerating throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, this effort was a complex tapestry woven from Enlightenment curiosity, imperial ambition, burgeoning academic disciplines, and sheer personal daring. It was an external intervention that resurrected histories that the direct descendants of those civilizations had, for a complex web of reasons, not pursued. This narrative is not one of a singular effort, but a multi-generational, international, and methodological evolution, from treasure hunting to scientific archaeology, that irrevocably changed humanity's understanding of its own origins. Part 1. The State of Oblivion and the Spark of Curiosity. The local relationship with the past. To understand the scale of the Western intellectual project, one must first appreciate the nature of the amnesia that had settled over the region. In Egypt, the Coptic Christians maintained a linguistic link to ancient Egyptian through their liturgical language, an evolution of Demotic, but even they could not read the hieroglyphs of the pharaohs. The Islamic conquests of the 7th century had overlaid a new cultural and religious framework that often viewed the pre-Islamic pharaonic past as a time of jahiliyyah, ignorance. The pyramids were marvels, but their builders were subjects of myth, not historical inquiry. In Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, the great cities of Babylon, Nineveh, and had crumbled into dusty mounds known as tells. For Arab and Kurdish villagers, these tells were often considered haunted by spirits, or, more practically, served as excellent sources of pre-fired bricks for modern construction. The cuneiform script that covered surviving tablets and monuments was utterly forgotten. Great lawgivers like Hammurabi or empire builders like Nebuchadnezzar survived only as distorted figures in biblical lore. The Levant, a crossroads for Hittites, Phoenicians, Canaanites, and Israelites, saw its ancient identities buried under successive layers of Hellenistic, Roman, Byzantine, and Ottoman rule. Local scholarship, where it flourished, was dedicated to Islamic jurisprudence, theology, and poetry, not to excavating a pagan past that was considered irrelevant or antithetical to contemporary monotheistic identities. The past was a backdrop to divine history, not a secular puzzle to be solved through excavation and decipherments. The Western impetus, Enlightenment, Empire, and the birth of disciplines. In stark contrast, 18th century Europe was in the thrall of the Enlightenment, which championed reason, empirical inquiry, and a secular fascination with human origins. This intellectual climate, combined with expanding colonial and imperial reach into the Ottoman Empire, created the perfect conditions for a scholarly offensive. New disciplines, like comparative philology, archaeology, and later anthropology were emerging, providing the tools to systematically investigate the past. The rediscovery was driven by a blend of motives: genuine, insatiable curiosity about human beginnings, a desire to find physical evidence for biblical narratives, and nationalistic competition among European powers to claim the prestige of uncovering civilization's cradle. It was this unique convergence, unburdened by local religious constraints and fueled by new scientific methods, that enabled Westerners to embark on a quest to unlock secrets that had eluded native populations for centuries. Part 2. The Egyptian Revolution, Napoleon, the Rosetta Stone, and Decipherment. The spark, Napoleon's savants. The pivotal moment that ignited this rediscovery was Napoleon Bonaparte's invasion of Egypt in 1798. More than a military campaign, it was a grand scholarly expedition. Napoleon brought with him a Commission of Sciences and Arts, comprising 167 savants, scientists, engineers, artists, and antiquarians. Their mandate was to comprehensively document Egypt with a major focus on its ancient monuments. They produced meticulous surveys, maps, and drawings of temples, tombs, and the Sphinx, culminating in the monumental Description de l'Égypte, 1809 to 1829. This work did not merely record, it sparked Egyptomania across Europe, creating a passionate public and academic interest in pharaonic civilization. It also established a potent and enduring model, scholarship advancing hand in hand with imperial power. The key, cracking the hieroglyphic code. Amid this frenzy, a discovery was made in 1799 by French soldiers fortifying a position at Rosetta, Rashid, a dark stone slab bearing the same text in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. Seized by the British after Napoleon's defeat, the Rosetta Stone became the supreme linguistic puzzle of the age. The Greek text provided the key. Scholars across Europe, most notably the English polymath Thomas Young, made initial progress, but the final breakthrough came from the French linguistic prodigy Jean-François Champollion. Champollion's genius lay in his mastery of Coptic, which he rightly suspected was a later form of the ancient Egyptian language. Using the royal names Ptolemy and Cleopatra from the Greek text as a starting point, he demonstrated in 1822 that hieroglyphs were not merely symbolic pictures, but a complex system combining phonetic signs for sounds, ideograms for ideas, and determinatives for clarification. His decipherment, announced in his Lettres à Monsieur Dacier, was a monumental intellectual triumph. It relied on Western access to Greek, a legacy of classical education, and the new science of comparative linguistics, not on any living local tradition. For the first time in over a millennium, the voices of the pharaohs could be read, unlocking histories, religious texts, and daily life from the pyramid texts to administrative papyri. Part 3. Unlocking Mesopotamia, Diplomats, Daredevils, and the Birth of Assyriology. Pioneering explorers, Rich and the Allure of Babylon. Parallel to the work in Egypt, Western agents in the Ottoman Empire began to turn their attention to the mysterious mounds of Mesopotamia. Claudius James Rich, the British East India Company's resident in Baghdad, 1808 to 1821, was a prototype of the scholar diplomat. Driven by classical and biblical curiosity, he conducted the first systematic surveys of the ruins of Babylon and Nineveh, mapping sites and collecting artifacts. His memoir on the ruins of Babylon, 1815, was a landmark work that scientifically debunked myths and laid the groundwork for future excavation, with his collection forming a nucleus for the British Museum's holdings. The Decipherment, Rawlinson's Perilous Climb. The Rosetta Stone for Mesopotamia was the Behistun inscription in western Iran. Carved high on a sheer cliff face on the order of Persian King Darius I around 520 BCE, it proclaimed his victories in 3 cuneiform scripts: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. The daredevil tasked with unlocking it was Sir Henry Creswick Rawlinson, a British Army officer and diplomat. Between 1835 and 1847, Rawlinson repeatedly scaled the dangerous cliff to make paper squeezes, impressions of the texts. His decipherment was a multi-stage feat of philology. He first cracked the Old Persian script, which was alphabetic and related to known Indo-European languages. Collaborating with scholars like the Irishman Edward Hincks, he then used this to decipher the more complex Elamite and Babylonian scripts. This breakthrough, equal in importance to Champollion's, revealed cuneiform as a syllabic script capable of recording multiple languages. It exposed the Semitic Akkadian language of Babylon and Assyria, and, later, the even older non-Semitic language of Sumer. This work was rooted in the cutting-edge philological methods developing in Europe. Local populations, whose historical focus was on the Islamic era, had no impetus to attempt such a perilous decipherment. The first diggers, Botta, Layard, and the Assyrian spectacle. With the script deciphered, the race to dig began. The first major excavations were less scientific archaeology and more a hunt for monumental art to fill European museums. In 1842, the French consul Paul-Émile Botta began digging at Khorsabad, uncovering the palace of Assyrian King Sargon II and its colossal winged bull statues, lamassu, which were shipped to the Louvre. He was soon eclipsed by the dashing British adventurer Austin Henry Layard. From 1845 to 1851, with modest funds and large teams of local labourers, Layard excavated the Assyrian capitals of Nimrud, ancient Kalhu, and Nineveh, Kuyunjik. His discoveries were breathtaking. Miles of alabaster bas-reliefs depicting royal hunts, battles and court life, along with gigantic lamassu and inscribed obelisks. His best-selling book, Nineveh and Its Remains, 1849, captivated Victorian England by bringing the Assyrians, often viewed through the lens of biblical villains like Sennacherib, vividly to life. These early excavations, though contextually destructive, proved the historical reality of empires previously known only from scripture. Part 4. Systematization, Scholarly Institutions, and the American Entry. From Treasure to Text, Rassam, Smith, and the Literary Treasures. The next phase saw a crucial shift from a sole focus on sculpture toward the recovery of texts, which held the true history. A key figure was Hormuzd Rassam, 1826 to 1910, a Chaldean Christian from Mosul who began as Layard's assistant and became a leading excavator in his own right. His finds were of unparalleled textual importance. At Nineveh, he discovered the great library of the last major Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal, a trove of over 20,000 clay tablets. From this library, in 1872, a British museum curator named George Smith, a former engraver turned self-taught Assyriologist, made a discovery that caused an international sensation. While sorting fragments, he translated part of a tablet describing a great flood that closely mirrored the biblical story of Noah. Smith's public announcement and his subsequent expedition to find the missing fragments highlighted the new driving force behind archaeology, the recovery of literature and history. The epic he had found was the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's oldest great literary work, revealing the Sumerians, to Sazek at Tello. Meanwhile, another civilization was emerging from the shadows, one even older than Assyria or Babylon. In 1877, French consul Ernest de Sarzec began excavations at Tello, ancient Girsu, in southern Iraq. His finds of exquisite Sumerian statues, intricate cylinder seals, and early cuneiform tablets revealed the existence of a sophisticated, hitherto unknown people, the Sumerians. This fundamentally reshaped the historical timeline, pushing the origins of urban, literate civilization in Mesopotamia back by 1,000 years. The American scholarly model, Nippur and the Oriental Institute. American institutions entered the field with a new emphasis on systematic academic-led projects. The landmark expedition was to the sacred Sumerian city of Nippur, conducted by the University of Pennsylvania from 1888 to 1900, led by John Punnett Peters and field managed by the meticulous John Henry Haynes. The team endured immense hardship, disease, banditry, extreme heat, to excavate with unprecedented attention to stratigraphy and context. They recovered tens of thousands of tablets, including the Sumerian king list and vast temple archives, which became the foundation for Sumerian studies. This institutional model was perfected by James Henry Breasted, 1865 to 1935, an Egyptologist and historian at the University of Chicago. In 1919, Breasted founded the Oriental Institute, envisioning it as a laboratory for the integrated study of the entire ancient Near East, a region he famously termed the Fertile Crescent. The Institute sponsored long-term, scientifically rigorous excavations across the region, from Megiddo in Palestine to Persepolis in Iran, and trained generations of scholars, emphasizing a holistic, interdisciplinary approach to the past. Part 5. Methodology evolves and national identities emerge. Pioneers of technique, Petrie and scientific archaeology. While large expeditions were organised, methodological revolutions were occurring in the field. The British archaeologist Flinders Petrie, working in Egypt and Palestine in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, is considered the father of modern archaeological method. At sites like Tel el-Hesi, 1890, he pioneered the concept of stratigraphic excavation, carefully peeling back layers in reverse order of their deposition. He also developed seriation, a technique for sequencing pottery styles to establish relative chronology. Petrie's work transformed archaeology from a search for treasures into a precise historical science. Archaeologist as nation builder, Gertrude Bell and the Iraq Museum. Some pioneers bridged the worlds of archaeology and modern politics. Gertrude Bell, 1868 to 1926, scholar, linguist, mountaineer, and traveller, possessed an unparalleled knowledge of the Levant and Mesopotamia. Her archaeological surveys and mapping were invaluable. Following World War I and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, her expertise made her a crucial political officer in the formation of the modern state of Iraq. Her greatest archaeological legacy was her profound belief that antiquities should benefit their homeland. She drafted Iraq's first antiquities law and, in 1926, personally founded the Iraq National Museum in Baghdad, championing the idea that cultural heritage was a cornerstone of national identity and should be preserved in-country rather than exported. The last great find, Carter and Tutankhamun. The era of the great pioneer archaeologists closed with a final, spectacular flourish. In 1922, after years of searching, the British archaeologist Howard Carter, funded by Lord Carnarvon, discovered the nearly intact tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. The global media frenzy was unprecedented. However, the subsequent decade-long, painstaking process of recording, conserving, and removing the tomb's thousands of objects signalled the future of archaeology, a discipline where meticulous science and preservation were as important as the discovery itself. Conclusion: a complex and enduring legacy. The Western-led rediscovery of the ancient Middle East is a narrative of breathtaking achievement and profound complexity. Its legacy is multifaceted. Intellectual triumph. There is no denying the monumental scholarly achievement. Entire civilizations, Sumerian, Akkadian, Assyrian, Babylonian, Hittite, Pharaonic, were resurrected from oblivion. Dead languages were revived, and millennia of human history were restored to the global narrative. The origins of writing, law, urban life, mathematics, and empire were illuminated. fundamentally altering our understanding of human development. Methodological foundation. The journey evolved from crude treasure hunting to the disciplined science of modern archaeology. Pioneers like Petrie, the teams at Nipper, and the Oriental Institute established the stratigraphic, contextual, and philological standards that define the field today. The shadow of colonialism. This history is inextricably linked to Western imperialism and nationalism. Excavations were often conducted under the aegis of colonial power or through inequitable agreements with the weakening Ottoman Empire. The removal of vast quantities of material, entire temple facades, libraries of tablets, iconic sculptures, to museums in London, Paris, Berlin and elsewhere remains a deeply contentious issue, a cultural appropriation that modern post-colonial nations and the field of archaeology continue to grapple with. The question of local agency. The framing of this rediscovery as a triumph of Western curiosity over local oblivion, while containing elements of historical truth, is an oversimplification. It risks diminishing the agency and knowledge of local populations, who were partners as labourers and guides, and who had their own rich, albeit different, relationships with the past. Figures like Hormuzd Rassam, though often marginalised in Western narratives, were central to discoveries. Later, scholars like Gertrude Bell understood that the future of this heritage lay in empowering local stewardship. In the final analysis, the unearthing of the ancient Middle East was a collaborative, if often unequal, human endeavour that spanned continents and cultures. It was driven by the universal human desire to understand our origins. The knowledge recovered belongs not to the West, but to the world. The challenge of the present and future is to preserve, study, and interpret this shared inheritance through a lens of partnership, ethical responsibility, and a recognition of the complex history that brought it back to light. The voices of Sargon, Hammurabi, and Gilgamesh, silent for so long, now speak to all of humanity, thanks to a century-long endeavour that stands as one of history's great intellectual adventures.